What? Let's get started. Tonight, we're going to talk about some great stuff. One of my favorite topics in ham radio is radio wave propagation. I mean, I just find it fascinating. Years ago, when I was in the Army Reserve, this is back in the days of when the reserve forces were just used for the sole purpose of being ready to fight the Russians, back in the days of the Cold War. Um, at the time, I had a, a big boombox, and I had it because it had AM FM radio, and it also had a cassette player. Who has cassettes anymore? But anyhow, had a cassette. But it also had two bands of um, shortwave frequencies. And you know what? I just started playing around with those and started listening to the short wave programs. Now, this was not ham radio. This was actually, broadcast radio from other countries. Since I was in the Army Reserve, I was very interested to hear what Radio Moscow was saying about us. And also our other big adversaries, the adversaries in this hemisphere, Radio Havana, Cuba. And those stations just came booming in. Of course, Radio Moscow doesn't exist anymore. Radio Havana is still out there chattering away. Anyhow, um, it wasn't all listening to the enemy back then because back then, there were also all the all the big countries had broadcast radio stations on shortwave. And that's things like Radio Canada International, Radio Deutsche Welle from Germany, Swiss Radio International, Radio Exterior de España, All India Radio. China, of course, had radio stations even back then. And there was a HCBJ from Quito, Ecuador. This was just fascinating. It just amazed me that, we're not talking about fancy equipment. We're talking about a shoulder model boombox, that with just a whip antenna could get radio signals from around the world. Um, at some point, I even actually heard some hams, and I don't know how that happened because, um, maybe some hams were broadcasting in full AM. Normally, in the shortwave bands, hams are broadcasting in single sideband, not not in full um, yeah, not in full AM radio. Anyhow, but I started to hear some, and that's kind of what got me interested in amateur radio. The this whole concept that you could sit here in Southeast Michigan and listen to the world on not a lot of power. A lot of these international stations were only broadcasting 250 watts or so. There were some big stations at 500 or 1,000, a kilowatt, but a lot of them at 250 watts. You buy a basic ham radio these days, a base model, not a handheld. A handheld will be 5 watts, but a basic ham radio will give you normally 100 watts. And wow, you can do wonderful stuff on that when the atmosphere is with you, when the ionosphere is with you. Um, I tell you, and it makes a big difference. Kind of some of the big ideas we're going to get at tonight. One of the biggest is that antennas matter because it's antennas that's sending your signal out into the atmosphere. Um, Recently, during a contest on the 10-meter band, that's about 29 megahertz, uh, I was having great luck contacting all kinds of stations in the South. This would be Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia. Um, but then later on during that same day, those stations kind of faded out, and I started hearing stations from the West. Stations like Kansas and Nebraska and Colorado, Utah, all the way out to the Santa Clarita Valley in California. And the 10-meter band that's not a great big long distance band. And I make a point of talking about the 10-meter band because your technician license will give you phone privileges, voice privileges in the 10-meter band. Just, your basic technician license. But what you get will depend very, very much on how the ionosphere is reacting.
Hey, Bob, I
That's
want to throw something out real quick if you don't mind.
what's that?
I want to throw something out real quick if you don't mind.
All right.
Um, when I took my tech class, um, they often, but not always, talked about phone. And I wasn't sure what that ever was until well after I got my license. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows when we talk about phone, we're basically talking about talking into your microphone.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. So that's all that means. That's the only thing different, because we talk about video, we talk about, digital, we talk about this, we talk about that, and then we talk about phone also. What is that? Well, how is that different? Well, it's not. It's the basic use of your ham radio. So I just wanted to throw that out there and just so none of you are, wondering about it. Get it out of your mind. It's unimportant.
And that's good. And thank you for that because you know what? I had that same experience as you had. Is like, people starting talking about, phone on amateur radio, and I wasn't sure. I just wasn't sure. But yeah, all that means is voice, and we're talking about voice um, as opposed to sending key clicks on your telegraph key. All right. So anyhow, big ideas and what we're going to cover tonight. Antennas matter. I'm going to give you um, kind of a little truism, which is not always true, but is usually true. When you're having trouble communicating, you know what? It's usually your antenna. It's not your phone. It's your antenna or the ionosphere, right? That's the usual thing. Another big concept we're going to cover a little bit is that the length of antenna matters. Your antenna length, the size of your antenna is going to be related, actually, it's going to be inversely related to the frequency you're speaking on. I think Mike covered back in chapter 2 that how as frequency increases, wavelength decreases. Wavelength shortens as frequency goes up. Okay? And in fact, I have a little graphic for you. You know what? In fact, I was going to start, we on this Zoom thing, we sometimes have trouble going between, our lessons and the regular PowerPoint presentation to graphics, to our slides. So I kind of thought that what I would do is that I would start by going through going through the graphics first and then hitting the actual lesson. But as we're talking about, okay, can you see that? Mike, am I sharing?
Yeah, I see
I'm
that.
seeing yes, the ham bands.
Yes, the ham bands.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, as I was saying, as the frequency increases, the the wavelength decreases. Okay, so now I've marked some ham bands on here, starting down at the 80-meter ham band. Now think about 80 meters. That's like 250 feet, and that's at 3 megahertz. All right. Most of these you don't have to remember, but I just want to give you a sense of the increasing frequency and the decreasing wavelength. All right. Okay, so 40 meters, um, that's 40 meters. That's half the length of the 80-meter band, and yet it's almost twice the frequency. The 20-meter band, that's 14 megahertz. So it's The frequency has doubled, but the wavelength has been cut in half. All right, now here's one that I kind of do want you to remember, and that is the 10-meter band. Because there can be a question on the test relating to the 10-meter band a little bit. It's really a 28 to 29 megahertz, okay? Then there's the 6-meter band. The 6-meter band should be an easy one for you to remember. Do you remember from last week, Jerry was talking about how to calculate wavelength from frequency? Okay, that works particularly good on the 6-meter band. Okay, so how do we get to 6 meters? Well, that's 50 megahertz. 50 megahertz. And how do we calculate that? Okay, you divide 50 megahertz into the speed of light, which in meters, which is, it's 300 million meters per second, okay? So 50 into 300 equals 6 meters, all right? That's kind of a good relationship for you to remember, all right? The 6-meter band, 50 megahertz. Another important one for you is going to be the 2-meter band. The 2-meter band is the most used band for technicians. For those of, well, yeah, because especially if you're interested in emergency communications, because that mostly happens on VHF and UHF. Now, Mike, you're involved with the CERT program. Do you know when you're doing street monitoring or anything? Are you in the 2-meter band or the 70 centimeter band, or does that matter? Does it change?
I'm on both, actually.
On both, okay. So
Yeah, and at the same time, when we're doing, if we're doing a set, which is, a statewide thing, we'll be on HF also.
okay. Oh, okay. All right. But anyhow,
But it's predominantly, we're local, it's 2
okay.
meter and 70 centimeter, and pretty equally.
Okay. All right. So, but for those of you for your test, it will be handy for you to remember that the 6-meter band is about 50 megahertz, and the 2-meter band, actually, if you divided 150 into 300, you come up with 2 meters. But the 2-meter band doesn't go up to 150 megahertz. It's 144 megahertz to 148 megahertz or so. But it's about 2 meters. Okay? So that's another one for you to remember. Now, and you saw on that how as the frequency increases, that 80 meter, that huge long 80 meter radio wave was at 3 megahertz, and that little bitty the 2-meter band, and 2 meters about 78 inches. So that's about 6'4" or something like that, 6'6". So 144 megahertz at about 6 feet, a little over 6 feet. 3 megahertz at 240 meter or 80 meters, 240 feet. Okay. Now, but the atmosphere is going to matter. Let me give you a little, where have I got a good one here? Why is this one still up? Mike, what are you seeing?
We see your ionosphere.
Okay. And is it filling your screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, what we're going to be talking about a lot, though, is the ionosphere. And the ionosphere is roughly from 30 miles, up to 200 miles, roughly. Well, I think the book tells you I think it goes to 180 or something. Depending on your what book you're reading, it's going to vary a little bit. But that's the order of magnitude, 30 meters to 180 or so. All right. Now there are several different layers in the atmosphere. You've read that in the book. Um, ah, the D layer, um, it can reflect some higher level uh, some higher level frequencies, though not necessarily. The E layer, there are some interesting things that go on the E layer, but the long distance communications happens up in the F layer. Now, the thing about the F layer, and you probably, and I hope you saw that in your book, all right, is the F layer comes in two delightful flavors. See. Uh, okay, Mike.
Yep, we see it day night.
Okay, right. All right. Now, you see here, we've got the D layer, and this is from a, I think this is pictures from the uh, Radio Society of Great Britain, and so they've got things calibrated in kilometers rather than miles. But you get the picture here is that the D layer is at 80 kilometers. The E layer is up at 110 kilometers, which would be, 7 miles or so. And then you get to the F layers, and there's a F1 layer and an F2 layer. Now, here's the deal. During the day, there's a D layer, an E layer, an F1 and an F2 layer. But you get to nighttime, and the F1 and F2 layers collapse. And the D layer and the E layer kind of combine, but get very, very um, much weaker. Okay, so you get that point. What else do I want to get to before I... Oh, something called gray line. At the point where 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 the Earth, changes from day to night, there's a transition period called the gray line, and you'll hear about gray line propagation, where you can get some distance, but it's somewhat hampered by the fact that you're going from day to night. So you're going from an area where there's a single F layer to a point on the Earth where you now have all four layers still active. Okay, let me see what I can do here. Uh, Hang on just a second. Por favor. I've got a lot of stuff open right at the moment, and I want to get rid of some of it. Let's see, get rid of that. Get rid of that. I'll leave that. Uh-huh. No. Bear with me, guys. Here's the next thing I wanted to show you. All right. Okay. The thing about frequency, here's the deal. Very high frequencies do not bounce off the atmosphere. very low frequencies, very, very low frequencies tend to get absorbed. But there's this sweet spot in between where um, where radio waves sent out from one point can reflect off the atmosphere and travel thousands and thousands of miles. Um, this is when you get to the bands like the 80-meter band, uh, the 40-meter band, the 20-meter band, and sometimes the 10-meter band, where you can get this uh, radio wave effect bending off the atmosphere and coming down thousands of miles away. Now, when the frequency gets too high, the frequency shoots right through the atmosphere. It doesn't bounce off it, it penetrates the atmosphere. So we're talking about radio waves with very high frequency, very short radio wave length. Now, is this good or bad? Well, actually, it's excellent, because if we didn't have radio waves that penetrated the atmosphere, we would not be able to communicate with satellites. We wouldn't be able to talk to the International Space Station. Uh, we, there are some radio waves we need to go through the atmosphere. So radio waves at different frequencies, they have their uses. Yes, sirree. Mike, you are seeing this, right?
I was just going to say, I'm seeing your face.
You are? Oh God, that's horrific. Hang on. Where was my? Well, I hope I wasn't making any faces. Well, I don't know what happened to
Looks
that.
like there might be a bandwidth constriction.
Yeah, you're not flowing too freely. You're bouncing a little bit.
Oh, am I?
Your sound is fine, but your video is a little bit blinky.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, and it says your bandwidth is low.
Let me see what I'm on. Huh. All right. Well, what happened? Well, I have no idea what happened to that chart that I was looking at. Well, let's see. Here's another one. Screen sharing failed to start. Okay. How about this?
Yes.
Okay. This actually isn't quite as good as the other one. But this in figure 5, it does show you that some frequencies, when you get the frequency high enough, it does shoot through the atmosphere, shoots through all layers of the atmosphere. And so that's what you use to communicate with, with satellites or the International Space Station. If Houston wants to talk to guys who are on their way to the moon, that's the way they would have to go. Okay. And then some of these others show how at lower frequencies, the radio waves reflect off the atmosphere and come down. And yes, and you know what, Mike, I just got a little pop-up that said my signal is unstable, and I don't know what that's about, but we'll soldier on here. Let's see. Let's stop sharing that. You know what? I've got a lot of windows open. I'm going to start closing some of these windows, and I'll hope that that's going to help. Let's close that one.
Yeah, and I fear that if you leave the meeting, it's going to close for everybody.
Yeah,
We'll all have to leave.
I know. Okay. Now, let me see if I can get a, what I want to show you here, and this is especially for those of you um, who maybe live in restricted areas. Am I sharing anything now?
Yes, you are.
A nice little antenna?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Um, all right. Since we're talking about propagation, we're talking about antennas. I just want to show you guys, especially for any of you who are in space restricted areas or in homeowner association areas where you're prevented from putting up a permanent antenna. I live in a condominium, and when I want to play radio, I have to go out and put up an antenna and then take it down when I'm done playing. What I'm showing you here is I'm showing you this vertical antenna that I use for the 10-meter and 15-meter band. I run out, I have this nice little tripod here, and I erect this antenna. With this antenna, this is the one that I've used. I've um, and again, we're talking about something that I put up in about 15 minutes, and hook it into my radio. With this, using 100 watts, I have contacted um, California, Texas, Washington, Mexico, a couple of places in the Caribbean, Trinidad, I think. Um, Also Brazil. I've hit Brazil with this, and Argentina. And and with this, I was actually able to hear someone in, I think it was Saudi Arabia. I couldn't contact them, but I could hear them. But anyhow, so this is just something, again, if you cannot put up a permanent antenna, a big huge dipole or something, this, there are ways for you to play radio. Okay, now let me get rid of some of these things. Um, where is that? Apparently I effectively closed out of that because I no longer see it. Okay, am I sharing anything now?
You are not.
Okay, well, let's try again then. How about now?
There we go. Another antenna.
Okay, yes. Um, this is another antenna, and this is, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later too. This is a dipole antenna, and it's one that I use for shortwave, 30, uh, um, 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz. That's the 80-meter band to the 10-meter band. What I want to show you about this is that you notice this is not a huge log antenna, but there are ways you can fake the extra length you need. And that's, can you see these little coils here? There's a little coil here and there's a little coil over there. They're just coils. They're inductors really. And what they do is they make up for the shortness of the antenna. Okay, so if I'm on the 20-meter band, and the 20-meter band, that'd be like say 64 foot, uh, 20 meters, about 64 foot wavelength. So a half wavelength dipole would be 30 feet. Well, this isn't 30 feet by any stretch of the imagination, but these loading coils, they kind of make up for it. Okay. And again, this is something that I can put up in 15 minutes and take down. So even if you live in an apartment, but you have a balcony, you could throw one of these things up there and communicate your way around the world. Okay, now that's out too. All right, I am getting these things closed down.
Hey, your video's cleaned up a lot too.
Okay. Oh, thank God. I was worried. All right. The last couple of slides I want to show you before we get into it. Um, I don't want that. Here we go. All right. Mike, am I sharing a magnetic
You are
wave?
not sharing at all.
I
Well,
am.
I'm sharing you.
Well, let's try this again.
There, it's coming now.
No, that's the antenna again, isn't
Yep,
it?
you got, yep, antenna again, yep.
Okay, well, let's close that out. And well, that's funny. Okay, well, tell you what. Let me pull one more. Well, no, that's not true. I'm gonna do two more. Well, that isn't the one I was going to. Do you see that?
Yes, signal source and
Yeah,
meters and shadow length scale.
yeah,
Shows them.
this is knife edge diffraction. You guys have probably heard about, read about knife edge diffraction, but what I wanted to point out, especially here, is that you notice that when the radio signal comes off this, a sharp corner, a sharp edge, it breaks up. Now, what you see here in the dark areas, that's areas where that signal can be coming in particularly strong. But you move a few feet and that signal is completely blanked out. What's happening here is the signal's been broken up and it's recombining. And sometimes it's combining in phase, and so it's very strong. But sometimes it's completely out of phase, in which case it cancels itself out and you get no signal whatsoever. Okay. All right, now let me get rid of that one. Okay, that seems to be gone. And then the other thing, oh no, get rid of that. The other thing we're going to talk about very, very shortly is we're going to be talking about the sunspot cycle. What happens in the ionosphere, what makes it good or bad, the ionosphere has to be ionized, it has to be active. And it gets that from energy that's pushed out from the sun. And this happens normally in periods of high sunspot activity. Now, what I wanted you to see here in particular, Mike, did that make it bigger?
Yes, I was
Oh.
just going to say, Bob, it's kind of small. It's kind of an eye chart. Can you zoom in? And just as I was going to say that, you zoomed in. Well done. You must be psychotic. I mean,
Yes, yes, I
psychic.
am. Okay, here's the thing, guys. The sunspot cycle. Um, Humans have been tracking this since the 1600s, and this is really cool because the sunspot cycle it varies in 11-year intervals. All right, we go for 11 years where there's a high part, a low part, and then it starts over again. Okay, um, so you can see the chart on top here that how um, it's been followed for so long, and you see it varies very much. Now, Um, nope, 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 nope. I wanted to increase this. Okay, down here at the bottom, right now we are in cycle 25. Okay, we're in 11-year cycle 25. Now, you see back in the 1990s, back in cycle 22, there was a lot of, see, what I'm referring to now is the bottom chart. There was lots and lots of sunspot activity, all right? But then with cycle 24, there was less. With cycle 23, rather, there was less. And cycle 24, which just finished in 2020 or 2021, that was awful. Um, it was just low sunspot activity. The 10-meter band, which is the HF band, you will have privileges on. The long distance band, you'll have privileges on. Uh, it was terrible at that point. Now it's picking back up, and we are regularly seeing the 10-meter band open up. Now, again, a lot of the activity for technician licensees is going to be not in the shortwave band, or shortwave, also sometimes called high frequency, HF. No, it's going to be in the VHF band, especially, if you're into emergency communications. All right, the VHF band. The VHF band is less affected by this because the VHF band, those radio waves do not bounce off the atmosphere. Those radio waves go line of sight. It's shorter distance, but it's more reliable. Okay. And do I want to do anything else here? No, I think not. Let me get rid of that. And I'll leave that up. Okay. All righty. Well, it looks like we've had a few other people join. Can I get her? Oh, yep. Okay. All right. Let's. Okay. Mike. Senor Mike. I tell you what, Dennis, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
It says technician license course.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize I was on mute, and I'm like, yes, yes.
Okay. 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 Well, I've kind of finished the dog and pony show, so let's just get started into the real work here in chapter 4. All right. Where am I? All right, radio wave propagation. This is just cool. All right, we're going to be talking about frequency of waves, characteristics of the environment. What they mean is the ionosphere. There's 3 kinds of waves we're going to be talking about, 3 types of radio waves. One is line of sight communication, one is ground wave, and one is sky wave. And we've touched on all those already. All right, line of sight. Now, this is of critical importance to those of you interested in emergency communications and those of you interested in local communication, because you'll be working on the VHF or the UHF band. The VHF band, of course, is the 2-meter band, around 144 megahertz, 146 megahertz. Or the UHF band, that's up in the 70 centimeter band. And that's, 440 megahertz, roughly. That's local, that's line of sight, and that's your, they also refer to that as direct path. And by direct path, they simply mean your signal is not bouncing off the ionosphere, it's just going straight like a bullet. Well, not quite, but uh, but it's going far as you can see. All right. Then there's ground wave. Now this is for lower frequencies, and in lower frequencies, the the radio wave can actually travel around along the ground for quite some distance beyond the normal horizon, beyond the visual horizon. Because it's just the radio waves can follow the curvature of the Earth. Okay, now reflection, refraction, and diffraction. Uh, don't worry too much about the difference in these words. They mean things just a little differently. But when they talk about reflecting, they're really usually talking about bouncing off the atmosphere or the ionosphere. Refraction, they're talking about um, when when the radio waves hit something normally. When the radio waves hit something and the radio waves are bent or whatever. Diffraction, same thing. And diffraction, oh yeah, here's back to the knife edge diffraction slide. And again, this is in the higher frequencies, especially. Where you're going to get a lot of this kind of stuff, though, is think about if you had a radio in your car with a nice little antenna on the hood. All right, you're broadcasting on the 2 meter band, so it's a nice short little wavelength, and but you're driving in the city, so your line of sight, uh, radio wave is going to be bouncing off and reflecting off buildings, lots of buildings and other obstructions that are at your level, and you can end up with this kind of thing. There's something else, and I think we get to it later. They're calling it flutter, I think, where you can be listening to someone, and if you're at home and listening to someone driving in a car, their signal may be very strong, then very weak and garbled, very strong, then nothing, then back to very strong. That happens, um, because as their signal hits buildings and whatnot, the radio waves keep going, but they can be broken up and then travel at different speeds. And so what you can be hearing the signal coming from different paths. All right, think about a radio signal that that diffracts along a building, and when it reaches your antenna, you could be getting two pieces of the transmission, but coming at just slightly different times. And by slightly, I don't mean a second different. I mean fractions of a second different. But it's enough that it's going to make it give you kind of a fluttering sound. And depending on how much they're out of phase, they can either again augment or they can wipe each other out. Okay. Multipath. Oh yeah, that's just what I was talking about. Was yeah, the radio signal can be coming to you, and again, very common when it's being obstructed by buildings and being broken up and coming to you in two different paths. Uh, that's multipath. And picket fencing. Yeah, picket fencing. That's the term they use for the fluttering sound that you hear from well, from a moving transmitter, they say, yeah, like from a radio in a car that's going through a city. Okay, now tropospheric propagation. Now, tropospheric propagation, this is when your radio signal gets bent in the lower regions of the atmosphere. Okay, it's really before it gets to the ionosphere. This doesn't always happen, but you can actually get more distance than than usual. I've just told you about, VHF, the 2 meter band being used, for local communications, up to, 30 miles, 50 miles on a good day. However, um, those of you who live in the Detroit area, if you listen to our classical station here, WRCJ, we have um, a music host on that station, a guy by the name of Dave Wagner, who who is also a ham operator and goes by the call sign W8DRD, Dr. Dave. Anyhow, one morning, this is back before I retired, so this would have been back about 2014, 2015. I was on my way to work one Monday morning, and he was talking about how, and this was between 6:30 and 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. He was talking about how the day before, on that Sunday, there had been um, an incidence of tropospheric ducting where radio signals on the 2 meter band were being heard in Michigan, in Detroit, coming from Chicago. And that is about 300 miles away, and that's unusual, but it can happen. And that's tropospheric propagation, sometimes called tropospheric ducting. And that happens when there's inversions of temperature inversions in the atmosphere. And I think it's sometimes when cold weather gets trapped to below warmer weather. Okay, and the ionosphere. Yes, we talked about the ionosphere. Okay, okay. Now this one says 30 miles to 260 miles. Very well. Okay. All right. Now the thing is up there, the atmosphere's thin, but it's thin enough that solar radiation can ionize the atmosphere. It can break apart some of those normally neutral atoms and create ions and free electrons. And those ions are conductive, and of course, the electrons, when they're pried loose from an atom, they go their separate ways. So, all right, the ionospheric levels we talked about. Again, now, notice when I was just talking about tropospheric ducting, look at where the troposphere is. That's the lowest level. Um, and some texts will refer to the troposphere as anything from the ground up to 30 miles. So they actually include the stratosphere in it. But the actual layers in the ionosphere that we talk about start with the D layer, which just starts at 30 miles up. And again, what you're seeing here is a D layer, an E layer, an F1 and F2. That's during the day. During the night, the E and D layers are going to combine in the F1 and F. Well, actually, the D layer kind of goes away, and the E layer spreads out pretty thin. And then F1 and F2, they combine to a single layer. Okay, and because they combine in a single layer, a lot of those signals that would have bounced off the F1 layer at nighttime are going to be bouncing off this combined layer, which is higher, and that's why you can often get further distance when you're in the 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz bands. Okay, the ones that bounce off the ionosphere. Think of it like just like shooting a cue ball. It's like the ricochet you get is wider. Okay. Oh, what's that? Oh, higher ionization refracts or bends radio waves more strongly. Yes, they do. Okay. And then the sunspot cycle. Yeah, I've told you about the sunspot cycle. And the higher number of sunspot cycles generally mean more ionization in the ionosphere. All right, and I've told you about the 11-year cycle. That's nice. I just think that's really interesting. I really do. Okay. Oh, yeah. What's this? The ionosphere reflects. Yes, we talked about that. Yes, the ionosphere is acting like a mirror. It's bouncing the radio wave like bouncing an image. Okay, and the reflection depends on the angle of incidence. Yes, the angle of the takeoff. The angle of incidence, it's more commonly referred to as the takeoff angle of your um, radio signal. Uh, as you get more into ham radio, you'll learn more about how to change the takeoff signal because this it matters a lot in the lower frequency bands. It does not matter as much in the higher frequencies, especially in the VHF and the UHF area. Okay, and yes, we talked about the higher frequencies, the very high frequencies, the VHF and the UHF. They go through the atmosphere. They do not bounce off the atmosphere. Although nothing's always true. Like we said, sometimes in the 2 meter band, you can get that tropospheric ducting where you get a little bending and get a bunch of distance. Okay, skywave or skip propagation. All right. Now this is responsible. All right. What they're saying here is skip is very rare in the 2 meter band and in the 440. You know, the VHF and UHF. Skip is very, very unusual. Skip is when you bounce the radio wave off the ionosphere, it comes back down, it can bounce off the ground and take more than one hop. It can happen, but it happens more so at the lower frequencies. All right. Oh, in this last bullet point, each ground to sky to ground trip is called a hop. Okay. But you can get a couple of multiple hops, and that's where you get some superb distance. Okay. Yes. Signals can take many paths through the ionosphere. Yes, they can. Especially, for instance, if you're using a vertical antenna, a non-directional antenna, your signal is going out in all directions. So yeah, and sometimes, sometimes a receiving antenna can get a radio signal from two different directions. All right. Oh, and then, yeah, that's the other thing we talked about. Randomly combined signals coming from different directions or coming in at slightly different times. They can cancel each other out or they can magnify each other. All right. Oh, fading. Yeah, fading. And this receiving signals from two paths or it's slightly out of phase, slightly out of time. This can cause distortion in your voice signal. But if you're doing data, if you're sending data like from your computer through your radio, through your antenna, yeah, it can mess up the data also. Okay, sporadic E. Oh, this is when highly ionized patches of the E layer, and this is a special one, highly ionized patches of the E layer can reflect some HF signals. And the HF signals they're referring to specifically here are the 10 meter band, also the 6 meter band, but also on VHF, the 2 meter band. Well, actually, 6 meters is actually considered VHF also. Okay, but 10, 6, and 2 can have this E layer reflection. And also the aurora near the poles can also reflect radio waves. Oh, the aurora, but also the meteor scatter. Did you know? Did you know that in the Earth's path, the Earth travels through a lot of junk every day in its orbit. And this is something like many, many tons of tiny, tiny debris, um, dust size and greater particles. We're actually getting, the Earth actually gets hundreds of meteors every day. You don't often see them. You mostly miss them, but there's lots and well, this slide says thousands of meteors every day, but most they say quite small. But those trails, those meteor trails, can they leave a trail of ionization, and that ionization doesn't last very long. But if you have a directional antenna, you can bounce radio signals off that. Now, you you've got to be patient, and oh boy, do you have to be tolerant of signals. Uh, let me here something I want to do.
Hey,
I
Bob, let
want
me
to
break
share
in.
with you.
Let me break in for just a sec. Jeff put something interesting up on the in the chat. He said that, and Jeff's microphone isn't working. So um, he said AT&T years ago were having trouble issues with cell phones for years, and then one guy figured out that they were putting the antennas at the wrong angles,
Oh,
and that ended up fixing their whole issue, which is
okay.
really kind of funny and kind of interesting. I wonder who got fired and if anybody got a raise.
Yeah, really. Okay, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to play for you a sound file at this point.
5 and 8, Aurora. 5 and 8, Aurora.
Do you see anything?
November 3-2.
Don't see, but we hear.
Kilo Charlie 2, Whiskey Lima, radio, over. Yeah, QSL, nice to see you again, and beautiful signal on the Aurora. 5 and 9, Aurora, here, 59 Aurora, Fox, Norway, 2-5, over. QSL, Kevin, you're also.
How about now?
950,
Yes.
73, thank you. 73, good luck, Victor Echo 3, Echo November, I'm going to QSY up 5.
Let me pause this a second. All right. A couple of things I want you to hear. First off, I want you to see that, notice the frequency he's on. He's on 50 megahertz. Okay, so he's in the 6-meter band. And the 6-meter band for aurora and meteor scatter is an excellent, excellent band. The other thing I want you to hear is the clear voice you're hearing. That's the guy who's broadcasting. This is his radio. But listen to the voice of the person that he's talking to. Listen how distorted it is. This is what a transmission that's bouncing off the aurora borealis sounds like. Okay, let's go back.
Okay, QRZ, Victor Echo 3, Echo November, Victor Echo 3, Echo November, QRZ.
Okay, Victor Echo 3, that's a Canadian station.
Alpha, Alpha 1, Tango, Tango. Alpha, Alpha 1, Tango, Tango, nice to see you, nice signal, 5 and 7, 57 Aurora, Fox, Norway, 2-5, Fox, November, 2-5, over. Yes, yes, Alpha's copy, 5-8, Aurora. And 2 Fox, Shot, November, 3-3, FX 33, over. QSL, thanks for Fox, November, 3-3, and enjoy the opening, we're a lot of strong signals out there. Alpha, Alpha 1, Tango, Tango, Victor Echo 3, Echo November, 73. 73.
That Alpha Alpha 1 Tango Tango, that Alpha Alpha 1, that is probably a station from Maine, New Hampshire, or Vermont. I can tell that by the number 1 in his call sign. That's that part of the country. So this is someone in New England, someone in the New England states communicating off the environment with someone in Canada, which I just think is cool.
Ending in hotel, ending hotel.
Okay.
5, Aurora 55, Aurora Fox, November.
All right. That is what, um, that's what, reflecting off the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights. That's what that sounds like. Meteor scatter is even, it's even more distorted. Okay. Now listen to this one. This is meteor scatter. There is no visual for this one. Okay. See, to listen to that for for a whole night, that takes a lot of patience. But I imagine it's pretty fulfilling also. Okay. Let's. Oh, wait a minute. I did that wrong. Let's go back here. Gotta share. Okay. Am I back to sharing? Okay. Good deal. Okay, yeah, meteor. The meteor leaves trails of highly ionized gas. Yes, but they don't last very long. And and again, your communications are very, very distorted. But you know, if you're into that kind of thing, wow, it's quite an accomplishment to be able to do that. Okay, what they're saying is for meteor scatter, you know, you can get contacts up to 1,500 miles away, which is pretty darn good. Where am? Yeah. Ah. Oh. Let's stop sharing here. All righty. Now that is the propagation portion. But we have a couple other fun topics to cover. And that is from the beginning. All right, we ready? All right. From propagation, we are going to go right into feed lines, antenna feed lines. All right. Now, what we got going on here? All right, the antenna. Your antenna system is composed of a couple of pieces. The antenna itself is only one of them. The other really, really important part of that is the feed line, or whatever kind of wire system you use to get the radio wave from your antenna back to your box. Excuse me. In between that, in between your feed line and your radio, your receiver, you may or may not, you may want to have some kind of auxiliary equipment, things like meters or tuners that help clean up your signal or measure how well your signal is performing. Okay, now we're going to talk about some stuff. We're going to talk about, all right, parts of the antenna. The elements, those are the conducting parts. A driven element is the one that's connected to your transmitter. The array, when they talk about an antenna array, you're talking about an antenna with more than one element. There are parasitic elements and driven elements, okay? Driven elements and parasitic elements. Now,
Now, can I be heard?
yes, Jeff, we can hear you.
Oh,
All righty. Hey. All right. Okay. Hey, guys. while we're talking about antennas and all these kind of things, let's see one. Ta-da! This, maybe I should stand back. All right, this is an antenna. This is a directional antenna, but I'm pulling this out now because you know what? We've just talked about driven elements, driven elements, parasitic elements, that kind of thing. All right, here's a directional antenna. This is the front, okay? Now, this one right here, this is the driven element. And by that I mean this is the only element that gets connected to a cable that gets connected to the radio. Now what I want to show you here is this little thing here, right?
Coax.
That's where your coax connects, right into here. It goes into this element. Now, so this is the driven element. All the rest of these are considered parasitic. Now the ones up front, like this is is called the director. All right. The one at the rear is called the reflector. All right. So, and of course this thing in the middle, this is a beam. A little later on, we're going to talk about polarity, and we're going to talk about horizontally polarized and vertically polarized. I wanted to show you a slide, but I lost it in there somewhere. I had it up, but it didn't share, and then it went away. And okay, the electromagnetic wave, the radio wave, it's an electromagnetic wave. What we got there? Hang on a second. Let me just mute everyone. Okay. All right, I've muted you all. If you need to talk, I think all you have to do is press the space bar on your laptop, if you're on a laptop. Otherwise, you just raise your hand or something and I'll unmute you. Okay, the radio wave, there are two parts to it. There is an electrical part and a magnetic part. They are at right angles to each other, like this. Now, the concept of polarity is determined by the electrical part, the electrical wave, okay? So if the electrical wave is parallel to the ground, that is parallel polarity. If the electrical wave is perpendicular to the ground, that is vertical polarity, okay? So this one, I have set up so that the elements are perpendicular to the ground, because you see I have this L bend here. So this mounts like this, and what this does is it puts out a vertically polarized radio wave. Now, vertically polarized radio wave is what you use mostly for FM on VHF. It's used mostly for, you know, local communications. Now, there's actually a question that could appear on your test that asks, what polarization do you use on the 2-meter band or on VHF for weak signal or long distance communications? For weak signal, most are used horizontally polarized. So I would have to take this off and mount this so that the elements are parallel to the ground. Okay. Vertical polarization, horizontal polarization. Okay.
And while you're showing antennas, Bob, I'm going to just show these real quick.
Oh, go right ahead.
This
I have
is-
sharing on, so go ahead.
Yeah, these are, some of the antennas that I like to make. This happens to be for 70 centimeter. And it's got that connection that Bob showed you on, same kind of connection. And this I would run this up through a piece of PVC, 12-foot piece of PVC, and then just put that on a stand. And this is a ground plane antenna, is what this is called. And this is 70 centimeter. This is the same kind of antenna, and this is for 125 centimeter. Is that right? Is it 125 centimeter or 100?
Centimeters?
It's the one above 70 centimeter.
Yeah. Yeah, 220.
220. That's what
220
it is.
megahertz. It's 100.
That's what it
It's
is.
1.25 centimeters. Yeah.
And so, it's just, you can see how small they can get.
125
And, antennas, I like making them. These are both just made out of, some wire that I had lying around from different things, different home projects or other projects that I had. You can make that antenna that Bob showed you a few minutes ago. It's a Yagi antenna, and a Yagi style antenna like that can be made out of a tape measure. It's really kind of funny, but yep, you can cut up a tape measure and make a Yagi antenna that actually works.
Yeah. In fact, this antenna. Oh, Ken was on earlier tonight. 88M. He's actually an engineer. He designed this antenna several years ago. I was having trouble getting into the repeater with my vertical antenna, and he designed this. And another ham, KE8BED Hugh, I guess actually built it. But if you look at this,
That's a beautiful antenna.
it is, and it works very well. And what Ken told me is that most of these parts are spare parts from an old, I think, a TV antenna. Anyhow,
Yes.
spare parts. And what he told me was that this piece right here was the only thing they had to buy, and this piece was $5 or $6.
Yeah, they're pretty cheap.
Yeah. So yeah, and this was made, and of course, and the PVC was scrap, and I actually, to turn it into a vertically polarized, I did have to buy this elbow thing, but that was $2 or $3 at Home Depot.
Yeah, and the cost difference between buying and making is astronomical.
Oh yeah, that would have.
You
That
can
would've
make
been
an antenna for a
200
few
bucks.
bucks, or you could buy that antenna that he just showed you for probably 150, 200 bucks, maybe even more.
Yeah.
I was just looking at a loop antenna for 80 meter, and I'm gonna make it because it's $2,000. Nope, I'm not buying that one. And I'll be able to make this thing for probably, gosh, I don't even think I'll spend 80 bucks.
Okay, class. The design criteria, I have that all documented. It's a very inexpensive, high-powered, super duper. You can put, you can take that all the way up to the max as far as power is concerned. Bob, I will let you hand out my email address, or you know
Okay.
what? I'll send a note through the chat, and if anybody wants it, 4-element. 146.6 megahertz. I mean, it dialed right into the dart, but that works across the entire band. So watch your chat, and if you're interested, I will find it and just send all that back to you. So back to work, Bob.
Okay, I've had lots of fun with that antenna, by the way. It's oh. All right, let's get back to, oh, wait a minute. No, did that wrong again. Okay, screen share.
Bob, are we still muted?
No.
No, Jeff, you're okay.
What kind of an antenna would we use if just us wanted to talk locally right here in the southwest, in this corner of the Michigan?
Well, that's an excellent, excellent question. It depends what you're going to use. Um, if you were going to use
It
something in
actually
your
depends
car,
who you want to ask.
something like this, it's a roof mount antenna for your car, but you know what? You could use this on your home too. You stick it out the window, stick it on something magnetic.
Yes,
That
high
would do.
plate.
Uh, you could do a vertical antenna, or you could do the directional antenna like the one we just showed you. It depends, um, but it doesn't take much to get local communications. Okay, the biggest thing is going to be um, stuff in your way. Obstructions on the ground, buildings and whatnot. Uh, if, for instance, Jeff, if, for instance, um, you were just going to say, oh, you know what, I just want to talk to people locally, and I'm going to go through the repeater. Have we talked about repeaters yet?
No, that's
Okay.
coming up in my next session, I believe.
Oh, that's okay. Mike will tell you about that. Those are separate things that extend distance for especially VHF and UHF. Although I understand there are some repeaters in the 10-meter band, but I don't know about them. But asked to unmute. Rebecca, did you want to chime in?
No, I'm just hovering in the background listening.
Oh, okay, fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I saw a little. Oh, maybe that was me that did that.
Yeah,
Uh,
nope, not me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Welcome, by the way. Welcome.
thank you. I'm
How's
a
beautiful
latecomer, but
downtown
I'm listening.
Lansing?
Yep, Lansing. But
Yeah,
like I said, I'm a latecomer. I'm just listening, so
yeah.
absorbing.
Okay, excellent, excellent. All right. Uh, oh, yeah. So Jeff, it depends. It doesn't take very much. If what you're using is a handheld that's 5 watts, you can get by with anything. Now they have the little rubber ducks that come with the antennas. They're not usually that good. You can extend your range considerably with one of those roof mount antennas, which are not very expensive. And by not very expensive, I mean, I don't know, like what, $15 or something?
Yeah. Yeah, you can get one for under $30 and really extend your coverage. And those two antennas that I showed, those ground plane antennas, I'll tell you, I have had amazing luck with those.
Yeah. Yeah, but so Jeff, and if you're just using a handheld and you're just using the rubber duck, the little rubber ducky that comes with it, um, your distance is going to be a couple miles at best. But uh, but the 5 watts you got is fine. It's just the antenna. So you perk up the antenna a little bit and you get better distance. And again, like I say, it doesn't have to be a super duper antenna. It doesn't have to be a 4-element Yagi. Just that roof mount ground plane antenna will extend your distance quite a bit. Okay. Now,
Yeah, I was trying to get my video back going real quick just to show this one. This is
okay.
one of those ones that I bought. It hooks on right onto my Bofang like you have, like you'll have that CERT will supply you with after you get your license. Just screws right onto it, and in this particular configuration, it is good for 70 centimeter And then it's got this little Velcro on here. This is just helping to keep it out of the way. And now, you got 2 meter,
Oh, cool.
so
Is
it
that a
works.
tape measure?
No, well, it feels like that's what's inside of here. But I bought this. I didn't make this one. So, it works okay. It doesn't work great, but it's better than the rubber duck. So, and I think I saw this online and it was on sale. The store was having stuff on sale for everything, everything on this screen for, 30% off or something like that. And I went, well, that's only $20. I'll give it a try. So, and again, if it would have been more than that, I wouldn't have paid 30 or 40 bucks for this. And I would not recommend it if you do find it for 30 or 40 bucks. I think its performance is not worth that. You can just get a straight whip that's about 3 feet long, and that will really, really enhance your signal.
Yeah. Jeff, whatever you do, it's going to be a compromise. You know, um, if you want to spend hundreds of dollars, you can get an excellent, antenna system for your 2 meter rig. But also either, handmade, homemade, or for just a few bucks, you can get something that'll do pretty well for you.
I'm cheap.
Okay, good man. So am I.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. Same here. I'd rather make them than buy them.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we talked about the parasitic element. Um, Resonance. That's actually going to be covered better in another chapter. Resonance. Uh, when feed point impedance is near zero. What they're talking about here is when you've got a good match between your antenna system and your radio. Okay, feed point. Feed point is where the transmitted energy enters the antenna. Okay, so that's again,
Receive, right?
That's that little stub right there. Okay, that's the feed point. Okay, radiation. Radiation we're going to cover really in chapter 9. The only thing you got to know is that, when we're talking about radio waves and radio, activity, this is not the kind of activity that you get out of an atom bomb. Radio waves are not ionizing. They will not, hurt your genes or your DNA or anything like that. It's the energy on radio waves is just way, way, way too low for that. Okay, electromagnetic waves. We've talked about that. Electromagnetic waves, yeah. What happens is, yeah, your radio puts out an electromagnetic wave. That electromagnetic wave travels through your cable. It gets to your antenna, and your antenna turns it into a radio wave. And a radio wave travels through free space. It loses some strength as it goes, of course, as you would expect. And when it hits another antenna, that other antenna takes in the radio wave. Its antenna turns it back into sends that wave down into the receiving radio, which turns it back into audio signals. Okay, polarization. Oh, we've talked about polarization. Now, the thing is, we talked about on the 2-meter band vertical polarization. Vertical polarization is normal for full FM, but horizontal polarization is used in the VHF bands for long distance or weak signal attempts at communications. Now, if the transmitting antenna is sending out a vertical vertically polarized wave, but the receiving antenna gets it as is set up to receive a horizontally polarized wave. What's going to happen is it's going to lose um, some of its integrity. It's going to lose some of its power. It can be garbled a little bit. Now, that's a big deal for VHF. Okay, that's a big deal for VHF and UHF. It's not such a big deal when you get down below 30 megahertz. When you get down below 30 megahertz, a lot of times your signal, your vertically polarized signal or your horizontally polarized signal, it's going to bounce off the atmosphere and it's going to be turned into an elliptically polarized signal. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of antenna that hits. It can hit a vertically polarized antenna or a horizontally polarized antenna. When it comes down as an elliptically polarized wave, either of those can take it just fine. Okay, cross polarization. Oh, okay, yes, yeah, I'm a little ahead of myself. Yeah, this cross polarization, sending out a vertically polarized wave to be received by a horizontally polarized system, yeah, it can reduce the reception terribly. But elliptically polarized waves, any polarization will send it, any polarization can receive it. Now, decibels. All right. All right. How many of you know and love logarithms? I really haven't used them since I was in high school. But there are 3 possible questions that could appear on your test. All right, this is one of those times when I'm just going to ask you guys to memorize 3 numbers. All right? Memorize the number 3, the number 10, and the number -6. All right, there's only 3 possible questions. Those are the answers. We'll hit those later. Okay, antenna gain. Antenna gain. Antenna gain is the apparent increase in power that you get from using a directional antenna. If you just have a vertical antenna, just a stick in the air, it's going to radiate its signal out in all directions. But if you use a directional antenna, like this one here, what happens is it sends all your power out in one direction. Now, when I'm on VHF, when I'm on the 2-meter band, my radio will put out 50 watts. Now, if I'm using a vertical antenna, that 50 watts will go out in all directions. Because a vertical antenna, it's like omnidirectional, all directions, all 360 degrees, north, south, east, and west. But with a directional antenna, I can limit the direction that the radio wave goes out in. Now, I never get more than the 50 watts that I'm sending out. It's just that all 50 watts are being consolidated and going in a single direction. Okay? Now, isotropic, you're going to hear about isotropic antennas. There is no such thing. It's a theoretical concept. And it's a theoretical concept used to compare power from other types of antennas. An isotropic antenna, if it did exist, would be a single point in space that radiates radio waves in all directions of the sphere, all directions simultaneously. Now, as you know, think about dropping a stone in a pond. Yeah, think about dropping a stone in a pond and how the ripples expand out from that center. That's that's what an isotropic would do, but it would do it not just on the flat plane, but on the spherical plane. Okay, like an explosion. Okay, omnidirectional. Omnidirectional. That just means an antenna, that is not um, restricting the direction of the power in a single direction. That would be like a vertical antenna, because a vertical antenna will send it out in all directions. All right.
Jack 24689. We'll 24-4.
And then, oh, the directional antenna we've talked about. Okay, now here, this is a radiation pattern for an antenna. This is a radiation pattern for an antenna as if you're looking down on it, as if you're, say, in a helicopter looking down on an antenna's radiation, how it's sending out its signal. Now in this case, this antenna is a directional antenna. You can tell that because it's sending most of its power in a forward direction. In this case, the antenna is facing toward the 0, and you see to the back of it, almost no radio signal goes rearward. You do have parts of the radio signal going out sideways. Okay. Oh, and this is referred to as an azimuth or azimuthal pattern. Okay. Oh, and this is it's calibrated in decibels. All right. Now the things we want to, there's some, yeah, this is just vocabulary. We're going to talk about nulls, lobes, main lobe, side lobe, forward gain. This, when we look at an elevation pattern, is going to make, these terms are going to make more sense when we look at not the azimuth pattern, but the elevation pattern of a radio signal. Okay, the elevation or the elevation pattern shows that's this one here on the right. It's showing you how the signal goes. It's showing you as if you're standing looking at it sideways, right? So the azimuthal pattern is what the signal strength looks like looking down on it, but this is looking at it from sideways, okay? Now in this case, and this looks like it's, probably a dipole antenna because it's going out in 2 directions. The main lobe, though, is where most of the power is going. But there are areas that are getting very, very little power. Okay, and those are the nulls. The side lobes, this would be at 90 degrees to where you're pointing the antenna. All right, that's the side lobe. Okay, and then this slope up here, this would be like the takeoff angle of the radio wave, because you'd be shooting your radio signal out in this direction. Okay, radio patterns, front to back ratio, and front to side ratio. Okay, front to back ratio. On the azimuthal pattern, the front to back ratio, it's just a measure of the efficiency of your signal strength. So the front to back ratio is the ratio of power in the forward direction, like here, as opposed to power in the rear direction. So, the more power it goes in the forward direction, the higher that ratio would be, okay? And then front to side ratio is the relationship between the power sent forward and the power that gets sent out to the side. Okay, and for maximum efficiency, of course, you want the front to back ratio very high and the front to side ratio, of course, also very high, because you want things going in the direction of interest. Okay, feed lines. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing okay. All right, the purpose of the feed line. And what we're talking about here are essentially the cables, okay? Yes. Oh, center conductor, jackets, whatever. Let's do this a couple different ways. All right, this is a coaxial cable. There's a drawing on top. There's a particular type of coax cable on the bottom, a picture. Now, there's an outside jacket, an outside insulated jacket. Then there's an inner conductor and a center conductor. There's a center conductor that this is really where your radio wave is traveling. Your radio wave travels on the outside of that wire, and then around that wire is a dielectric, an insulator, and then around that is another conductor covered by a protective sheath. All right, and it looks like this down here. Pretty cool, huh? For coaxial cable, it's easy to use. The cool thing about this is if you're stringing it outside your house, you can string it along a gutter. And the fact that the gutter is metal is no problem because this is shielded. You know, the center conductor is
Is that an inductive ground?
I'm sorry, what?
That mesh, is that an inductive ground?
The mesh, no, no, that's conductive.
Uh,
This thing here, yeah, that's also a conductor, and that can be um, on some types of antennas on a dipole. You would connect the center conductor to one half of the dipole, and this braided shield, this would go to the other half of the dipole. Yeah, it's conductive. Okay, the coaxial cable can have higher loss than other types of cable or other types of feed lines. You know what? While we're here, though, let's look at some. All right. Now here, oh, what's best in focus? You see that? This is kind of what it was showing you. This is like RG58. It's very, very thin here, very small conductor. This would be okay for very low frequencies, and especially if you're not going long distances. You get a little better with something like this. Now this is called LMX 400. Now you notice the center conductor here. Oh, you know what? I try and get it closer, but it gets out of focus. So the center conductor here, yeah, that's a nice solid piece of copper. And then it's got the braided shield also, and the nice thick center dielectric. And you notice the difference in thickness. This is excellent for VHF and UHF. And for those of you who play around in the microwaves, you'd be using this or even something bigger. Thing about this stuff costs, this is really cheap. It's 20 or 30 cents a foot, something like that. This LMR 400, the last time I bought it, it was $1.25 a foot. It's very low loss for cable, very low loss, but it's a little harder to work with, you know, because it's pretty thick. This is easy to work with, but in the higher frequencies, it's more loss. Okay. I am chattier tonight than I expected to be. All right, let's go. All right, open wire line. This is cool stuff. The problem, and you know, you probably see some of that. Those of us who are old enough and remember rabbit ear type TV antennas, you know, this this kind of stuff is twin lead stuff is something that is very common to us. It's also there's also something very much like it. It's called window line. That's yeah, it's it's just got spacers in here, and this is very very good stuff. The problem with it is that it's not insulated, and so if you're running this, outside, this is not something you would want to run along your gutters or next to anything metal because again, it's not insulated, but it's very low loss and not very expensive. And if you have situations where you can use it, you'd be very happy with it. Okay, well, characteristic impedance, yes. All right. Now, impedance, we're talking about, of course, resistance. Coax is normally 50 ohm impedance, although some is 75 ohms. Open wire line or ladder line, that can be 300 ohms. 300 ohms is very common. 450 ohms is very common, but there are others also. The thing is, when you take these lines and get them back to your radio is normally expecting to see 50 ohms. So you've got to do something to connect some of these things into your radio. If you don't have a good match, what happens is you transmit, and part of your signal is not going to make it out the antenna. It's going to be reflected back into your rig, and that's very bad. Okay. Yeah, yeah. That mismatch, is called it's called a mismatch, and it's measured by an SWR meter, a standing wave ratio meter. A standing wave ratio meter, a modest one, which is looks like this. A nice little thing. This I bought at a swap, and I think I paid $50 for it. It's perfectly fine. And this one, which one? Oh, this one has a dial here where this is an SWR meter, a standing wave ratio meter, but it can also be a watt meter where it can measure forward power and reverse power. So this is both an SWR meter and a watt meter. I've only used it as an SWR meter just because that's the way I am. Okay. Let's get back to here. All right. All right. Yeah, now, okay. And yes, as I was saying, if the antenna feed point and the feed line impedance does not match, what happens is some of the power is reflected back towards your transmitter, and that's not good. And in fact, what's going to happen is that most modern radios will start to automatically reduce your power to prevent harm to your radio. So yeah, you need to do something to handle that. Okay. The normal ratio is the perfect ratio would be 1-to-1. 1-to-1 meaning that the power you're trying to send out gets to your antenna and gets sent out. 2-to-1 means that not everything is getting out, but it's pretty darn good. And then you start getting above that, and then you start getting into trouble. All right. Now there's a way to get around that, and there is something called an antenna tuner. Um, in the olden days, they used to also call it a transmatch, although you don't hear that much anymore. What the antenna tuner does is it really doesn't tune anything. All it does is it matches the impedance or the resistance of your antenna feed line to that of your transmitter, your transceiver. That's all it does. So that mismatch is still there, but it's just not going to hurt your transceiver at all. Okay, dummy loads. And I don't know if they have um, I don't believe they have a question on a dummy load. Or at least I don't remember one right at the moment. But what a dummy load is that's just a way for you to, it's a resistance that you use to tune up your antenna and your system. It's not so much your system, it's your radio. You hook up to a dummy load uh, instead of the antenna, so you can play around adjusting your radio without annoying lots of people out there, because your signal is not going to go out over the air. It's going to be um, taken up by this dummy load. And what does a dummy load look like? Haha, funny you should ask. Let me show you. Here is a very crude dummy load. All right, so this I hook right into my transmitter, and I can play with it all I want. And what happens in here, and this, yes, this is just a 5-gallon paint can, or 2-gallon paint can, whatever. But anyhow, it's filled with oil, and inside there is a great big resistor. And so what happens is all the power, when I'm keying up my radio, all the power goes in there and it's dissipated through that resistor. It's dissipated through the oil. It's dissipated as heat. Because that's what resistors do. They take power and turn it into heat. All right. Let's come back here and see what we're doing. All right. And so that's what a dummy load is. And that, how are we doing? You know what? I wanted to, geez, this is taking a lot longer. There's another little section, but I don't think I can do it justice. Do you know, I think Jerry wanted to do a little more with chapter 3. And chapter 3 is an important one. Chapter 3 is important. But I got a little more to do here. But we're already, what are we, about 10 minutes to 9?
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well,
Yeah, 10 to 9. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're we're at 9:51. Okay, tell you
I
what.
need cataracts.
Oh, I had mine done. So you know what? I'll tell you what. Let's do. Let's go ahead and let's stop for the night, and I'll pick up a little bit next time, and I think Jerry is going to use part of next time also to finish up a little bit on chapter 3, because chapter 3, electricity, that's a big one. And Rebecca, I don't know how much physics background you had.
High school.
High school, okay. Um,
Oh.
But chapter 3, I think it's a key chapter. There could be a lot of questions on it, and it'll be a good one for you to sit in on also. you know, the thing is, for this amateur radio tech license, you know, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you through the exam. And the subject matter we cover, it's like it's a mile wide, and this is Jerry's favorite quote. The subject matter is a mile wide, but it's only 1 inch deep. But you got to know a lot about no, not a lot. You have to know a little bit about a lot of different stuff. So, but the electrical stuff is probably the hardest part for the whole exam. When we get to chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9, that's all really, that's downhill. That's all easy stuff. It's mostly administrative stuff and procedures and things like that. It's all right. It's kind of fun. But chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, yeah, those are the meaty ones. Anyhow, so let's do that. Let's wrap up for tonight, and then let's take up next week. We're going to do a little bit more with chapter 3 and a little bit more with chapter 4. Okay? And that's the nice thing about that is, you know, you don't have to go on to chapter 5 for next week, but review chapter 3 and chapter 4, and I think we'll be golden. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okey dokey.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty.